Come on, everybody. Let's go. Get ready for a summertime adventure from another Sommer-Time Story. This is the story of Tied Up in Knots, written and told by award-winning author Carl Sommer.
Benny and Sally liked growing up on the farm. There were lots of things to do. First, they would work. Then they would play. But there was one thing they would not do. Benny and Sally would not share. Only Benny could play with Benny's toys, and only Sally could play with Sally's toys. The same was true for their mules. Bossy was for Benny, and Stiffy was for Sally. What was the one thing they would not do? All right, Noah?
They would not share.
They would not share. And that's a sign of what, Andrew?
Being selfish.
Being selfish. It's about me. Me. It's mine. I'm not going to share my toy with you. It's my toy. It's my. And you know, that's a very sad way to live. You're going to live a very miserable life if you live that way. If you're going to live that selfish life, you know, happiness comes when you love others. You love your neighbor like you love yourself. You love people. You try to make other people happy. Selfish people are not happy. All they're interested is to make themselves happy. And I'll just share this too, because you could put this in the back of your little heads, okay? But I'm going to be speaking to you for your future, and I'm going to speak to the parents too, all right? One of the keys to having a happy marriage life, and I'm married now over 60 years, and I'm happily married, all right? I was 24 years old when I got married. My wife was 20, so my wife is 80 and I'm 84, and we're happily married. And one of the keys is not being selfish. I want to make my wife happy. I really do. It's not. I'm just not saying this here. I help her. And sometimes I cook. And I'm a dangerous cook because I experiment. I don't go by a recipe. I make them up sometimes. And sometimes the food tastes good. And sometimes, well, let's forget about that, okay? But I experiment, all right? I try different things. And one of my favorite foods that I discovered, I take fresh vegetables and I cook them I make my own chicken broth. I put a whole bunch of chicken bones in together and put vegetables in it and drain it. And then I use that broth for this vegetable. I get all fresh vegetables and bean sprouts and broccoli and carrots and all kinds of vegetables in there, asparagus and cabbage and bok choy. And I cook it very shortly so it's nice and fresh and healthy. And then I might put some chicken in there, some steak or something like that with it sometimes. I usually do that too. But it's delicious when it's fresh. And I cook it very shortly. It's my own version of Carl Sommer's chop suey, all right? But I do that also because I want to eat healthy. Vegetables are very healthy to eat. And that's what I try to do. But one of the things to learn in life is to care for others. When that day comes, and that's way in the future, when you're going to have to pick someone to marry someone who's unselfish, who wants to make you happy, not just himself or herself. An unselfish person will be interested in making you happy. That's what makes a happy marriage. And I'm going to give you another key, all right? And we're going to find it in the story too. Marry someone who listens. Who listens. All right? Because sometimes some boys and some girls, they're men and women when they get older, they don't listen. They only want to do everything their own way. They're very selfish. It's me, 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 me. And these marriages are very, very, very unhappy. And there's too many unhappy marriages. And many of them because they're so unselfish. They don't give. They don't help anybody else but themselves. Everything is me, 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 me. So you learn to do that. And here they are now. Watch and see what's going to happen here. They're fighting over the toys in here. They're very unhappy. So you learn not to live this kind of a way. If Benny asked to ride Sally's mule, Sally would cry out, "No, that's my mule. I'm not sharing." If Sally had one of Benny's toys, Benny would grab it and yell, "Give it to me. That's not your toy." Benny and Sally just would not share. When Mom heard them yelling and fussing, she would tell them, "Be kind to one another. Remember, sharing brings happiness." But Benny and Sally would not listen. They thought sharing would make them unhappy. What did Mom try to tell them to do, Deshaun?
To be kind to one another and sharing brings happiness.
Yes, Mom said be kind to one another. Remember, sharing brings happiness. But what does Benny and Sally do? Jocelyn?
They wouldn't listen.
They would not listen. That's such a big, big problem with children. So I have 5 children. I got 20 grandchildren. I've taught children for years and years. I've been a high school teacher. They're older they're teenagers at that age. But so many don't listen. And it's so important to have listening ears to learn. Not that we obey everything we hear, but at least we listen. Your parents, you should obey because they love you. They always want the best for you. Sometimes your friends want you to do bad things. Then you say, "No, I'm not going to do it." You don't listen to them. You don't listen to bad advice. But you should always have listening ears. And these two are very stubborn, no. And here's their mom, sharing brings happiness. Why don't you share your toys with one another? Why don't you play nice with one another? And some girls and some boys, they just always fighting. Their home is always fighting. And you might have a home like that. At least you do it. Don't imitate the others. Be smart. Don't follow that lifestyle of being so selfish. It's mine. It's mine. No, don't touch them. Don't touch. They're my crayons. You can't have them. No, no. And a lot of tension. And they're not happy doing that. They're not happy. Benny and Sally did not know it, but Bossy and Stiffy had become just like their owners, not very friendly and not very kind. Once, when Sally was not around, Benny hopped onto Stiffy to go for a ride, but Stiffy stiffened her neck and would not move. Sally's mule was for Sally, not for Benny. When Sally tried to sneak a ride on Bossy, the stubborn mule dug in his feet. He was not about to take Sally anywhere. He was the boss. Benny's mule was for Benny, not for Sally. When Dad tried to use Bossy and Stiffy, the stubborn mules acted just like Benny and Sally. They would only fuss and fight. They did not want to work together and share the load. Haven't those mules learned yet that sharing brings happiness? Asked Mom. I guess not, said Dad, shaking his head. But I think it's time to teach them. Now, Dad finds that the mules, look at them here, they're just fussing and fighting. And they're farm animals. They got to learn to work on the farm. And just like if you have a dog, if you don't train your dog, they're going to make dirt all around the house. They'll tear up a house, but you got to train them. And it's amazing what you can do with a dog. You know, dogs are very trainable. Now, a cat, we kind of difficult, but a dog is very trainable. They'll sit, they'll stand. You can put a piece of meat in front of their mouth. They wouldn't even touch it until you say, "Here, take it." You know, they will listen to you. They'll walk by your side. But you got to train them. And these two stubborn mules now, they don't want to work together. So Dad says, I'm going to have to teach you a lesson. And you know, that's true with your parents. Your parents don't want to punish you. I never wanted to punish my children. I wish I never had to. But you know, I didn't get 5 little angels into my house, you know. I had 5 children, 4 boys and 1 girl. And they just did always say, just, yes, Daddy, yes, Mommy, whatever you want me to do. I had my issues with my kids, but I loved them very much. We went all kinds of trips. We either traveled through or went camping or traveled through in 48 states in the tent. And we did a lot of swimming and fishing and mountain climbing, and I played all kinds of games and things like that. In fact, when I was a high school teacher, I did that. And during that time, I was writing my book, Schools in Crisis. And so I would take it along, and I would be studying, and then I would play with them in the afternoon. And we had lots of fun together as a family. And I played with them a lot. I played basketball, even played football. I played tackle with them in the 50s with a church group. I would play with the boys in my 50s, tackle. It wasn't rough tackle, you know, but I kept active. And I still play games with my kids, so I'm still out there playing and volleyball and things like this, you know, when they have an opportunity. But, you know, parents love you. They don't want to punish you. Watch, I'm going to give you a secret. I'm going to say it soft, okay? You'll never get punished again. Here's the secret. Always obey them. Do you get that? If you obey your parents, you'll never get punished. So be smart. Listen and obey. And don't gripe and don't compare yourself. So-and-so goes to bed later, why can't I? And they shed the tears, how much they suffer because they have to go to bed a half an hour earlier. And they go to bed mad, make a sad face. Of course, you don't do that. Does that happen sometimes? Maybe. That you gripe, huh? Yeah, maybe, huh?
Sometimes they stay up in the night.
Yeah. Oh, don't point. No, don't point. No.
Sometimes they go in the night.
Don't point. Yes, because I have 5 children. I know what goes on. I have a little experience. I got 20 grandchildren. I see what goes on sometimes. But they're miserable. If you say, okay, I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to trust my parents. They know what's best for me. You'll be a lot happier if you learn to do that, and you'll be healthier too. Your body needs rest. And some children are so foolish, they want to go to bed late. And there's a funny thing. They don't want to get up in the morning. They're tired, they're grumpy. Well, go to bed earlier so you'll be fresh. You don't wake up grumpy, I hope. Uh-oh, better not go there either, huh?
One time. Maybe.
My brother always.
Learn to listen to your parents. You'll avoid many, many, many mistakes in life. And you'll live a much happier life. Early the next morning, Dad tiptoed into the barn, being very careful not to wake the sleeping mules. He picked up the rope that was around Bossy's neck. Then he got the rope that was around Stiffy's neck. Quietly, he tied the ends together. Then Dad and Mom left to go to town. Benny and Sally began the day as always, taking care of Bossy and Stiffy. They filled the big tubs with water and stuffed the troughs with hay. "Here, Bossy," called Benny as he opened the barn door. "Time to eat." "Come, Stiffy," yelled Sally. "Breakfast is ready." Bossy and Stiffy stretched and yawned, then headed straight for their food. As the mules neared the hay, they felt a heavy tug at their necks. Suddenly they stopped. "What's wrong, Bossy?" asked Benny. Sally saw the problem. "Stiffy, how did you get tangled up with Bossy?" "Somehow they got tied up in knots," Benny exclaimed. Bossy and Stiffy did not care about the rope or the knots. They were hungry and they were ready to eat. They began pulling harder and harder. But the harder one pulled, the harder the other pulled. And with all their pulling, they were not getting any closer to their food. Meanwhile, the knots got tighter and tighter. These two mules are just fighting against each other. And the only thing that's happening is this knot here in the middle over here is getting tighter and tighter. And no way is one of those mules is going to share their food with another. And so now they're pulling and jerking and just fighting. And just like children playing sometimes, you see them so selfishly, mad, arguing, fighting, unhappy because they're not willing to share, and they're miserable. These mules now are not happy. They are miserable. They're hungry. They want to eat, and they can't. They're fighting against each other. Thinking he was stronger, Bossy turned around backwards and began tugging. Not to be outdone, Stiffy did the same thing. They pulled and pulled and pulled. Still, they were not getting any closer. "Those knots are keeping them from eating," shouted Benny. "Why don't you untie them?" Sally yelled back. Benny tried, but the knots were much too tight. "Get Bossy to come to the middle so Stiffy can eat," ordered Sally. "No," Benny argued. "Why should your mule eat first? You have Stiffy come to the middle so Bossy can eat first." Sally smiled and said, "Ladies first." "But my mule is older," Benny snapped back. "The older should go first." Meanwhile, Bossy and Stiffy kept tugging. Bossy and Stiffy were now hot and tired, hungry and thirsty. They waddled back to the middle to rest. What did Sally say? Olivia?
Ladies first.
And what did Benny say? Dijon?
The oldest first.
The oldest goes first. So they're fighting. No, the ladies first. No, the oldest first. And they're not going to let their mules share. They're unhappy, Benny and Sally. The mules are unhappy only because they're not willing to share. And the root is they're selfish. It's only me, 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 me. I don't care about anybody else. I want to be happy. And there's nothing wrong to be happy. I think we all want to be happy. But the secret of happiness, listen, is when you make other people happy. Try it. Try to go out of your way and make someone happy. You ever purposely try to make your mom and dad happy? Doing some things? Did you ever try that?
Yeah.
I mean, just think today. When I go home, what can I do to make mom happy? Some of you are going to have your parents come over here. I tell you a very easy way to make a mom and dad happy. Give a big hug, big kiss, and say, "I love you, Daddy." And when they're just sitting there unexpectedly, and they might be sitting on the couch or something like that, just go up to them and put your arms around them and give them a big hug. Even you older girls. This is not just for kiddies. Even when you're 20, 30, 40, parents love it when their children give them a hug and say, "I love you, Daddy, I love you, Mom." All right? Be a lover of people. All right? That's the key to happiness. And meanwhile, they're just selfish. It's only me. Sally, no. Ladies first. Benny, no. Oldest first. And the mules are just fighting. Bossy closed his eyes and let out a great big groan. Oh! When Stiffy heard Bossy groaning, she got an idea. Quickly, she jumped up and raced toward her food. Bossy heard her jump. He was not about to let Stiffy eat her food first. In a flash, he sprang to his feet and raced for his food. Bossy and Stiffy ran so fast that when they came to the end of the rope, they were yanked off their feet. "Ouch!" shouted Benny as the mules hit the ground. Sally gasped, "Are they all right?" Bossy and Stiffy did not even utter a sound. They slowly got up, shook their heads, and wobbled back to the middle. They were now very hot and tired, and very hungry and thirsty. Nothing they did worked. Just look at those two miserable mules, very, very unhappy, tired, hot. Nothing is working. They're hungry. They're just miserable. And that's where a lot of selfish people are. They're miserable. If they would have learned to share, they wouldn't be like this here. But now they have a very miserable life here. They're very unhappy. Benny headed for the barn. "I'm getting the cutters," he mumbled. "Dad's not going to like it if you cut one of his ropes," warned Sally. "We wouldn't have to if your stubborn mule would stay in the middle," Benny argued. "My mule?" asked Sally. "Why don't you have your stubborn mule stay in the middle?" "If we can't agree," said Benny, "I'll just have to cut the rope." "You better not," warned Sally. "That's a new rope." "Well, I'm not going to let your mule eat first," said Benny. "That's just not fair." "And why should I let your mule eat first?" Sally argued. "That's not fair either." "Well then," snapped Benny, grabbing the cutters, "we'll just have to cut the—" "Wait!" shouted Sally. "Look!" What is Benny going to do now? Claire?
He's going to cut the rope.
Yes, he's going to cut the rope. And Sally says, "You better not. That's Dad's new rope." And let me say this here. Parents have rules in the house. They have certain rules, what they want you to obey. And wherever you go, there's rules. Schools have rules. All right? Society has rules. I was in the Marine Corps. You talk about rules. It was nothing but rules. You had to wake up when they say wake up. You had to march to when I was in boot camp, I was in Paris Island, South Carolina, right? And you couldn't scratch yourself. You stood at attention. You had to keep your hands down, and we had sand fleas, and they would bite. And it was when the Marine Corps is at attention, you stand at attention, and these little sand fleas were biting my hand, biting the back of my neck, and they were coming on my face. They wouldn't see that, so I'm blowing, my lips were blowing so much. And this is way back. This is back in 1951 when I was drafted in the Marine Corps. That's many years ago, during the Korean War. And you couldn't move. And the military requires discipline. And when the DI, which is a drill instructor, tells you to do something, you better listen, and you better not scratch it. I wouldn't want to be in your shoes if you scratch it. They were teaching us discipline. They had all kinds of rules. In fact, in boot camp, this is only in boot camp, we couldn't even go to the bathroom when we wanted. We could only go when they allowed us. And if you had to, I have to go, there was a certain procedure, a certain rule. You go to the door, knock on the door, and they say, "Come in. What do you want?" "Private, first class, Carl Sommer requests permission to go to the head, sir." We use the term head. That's a Navy term for a bathroom. "I go to the head, sir." And they would say, "Come in." You take 3 steps in, and you say, "We would like to," you give you a request that you want to go to the head. And they could say no, or they could say yes. And if they said no, too bad. If they say yes, you do an about face, and you run out, and you go. That was what they're teaching us in the military. You have to obey rules, because when you get on the battlefield and you're in the jungles fighting, and a mosquito goes on your nose, you don't go shaking that bush so the enemy sees you. You better be still. And when they say charge, you better charge. They were training us. And every day was the same thing. We got up in the morning, went to bed when they told us to go to bed, and I was tired. I remember sitting in the classroom. It was an interesting subject. I was falling asleep. I wanted to learn it, but I was so tired. But you had to do whatever they told you to do. And but one time after I got out of boot camp, we went and I was going to go to Korea. I didn't have to go to Korea. It was the 3rd Marine Division. We marched in the middle of the night, and we had to find a place to sleep. And I think it was about, if I remember right, it was about 1 o'clock when they finally said, okay, time to go to sleep. And I had to wake up at 2 o'clock, I think it was, for guard duty for an hour. So you just find a hole in the ground, bumpy hole, just lay on the ground sometime. I got to go to sleep, and all the bumps, not nice grass. Believe me, we didn't have grass, And you're laying out there, and you have to get up in the middle of the night. You get up there, guard duty, and you go back again to sleep. And then I think we got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, tired. But they're teaching you to become a Marine. They want you to be a good soldier, And there's rules, and schools have rules, and you ought to be thankful if they have rules and they're being obeyed. I wrote this here book, Schools in Crisis, Training for Success or Failure. I substituted in 27 different schools to find out what's going on. Terrible. The rules, the unruliness and disrespect of the teachers, and kids running around the halls and disrespecting, breaking up fights, being stomped on, and being yelled at by students. I mean, it was terrible. You can read it. It's free on the web, on our homepage at advancedpublishing.com, And it's terrible what was going on in the schools because they didn't have rules. Are all schools like that? No. The 2 high schools I taught in were pretty good. But you need rules. Your parents have rules. And so just like parents, so if you're smart, learn to listen to them. Don't go always fighting, always complaining, right? If you're smart, you'll learn to listen to them and listen to society rules. And I tell you another thing. When you get older, you break a rule, you steal, they'll put you in jail. If you go too fast in the car, you say, I'm not going to listen to that. They'll give you a ticket. And you do it again, they give you a bigger ticket. And there's a lot of rules in society. And just like running a business, there's all kinds of rules. I try to obey them, right? And so you're smart, learn to listen to rules. Sally and Benny ran toward the mules. Bossy and Stiffy were still tied up in knots, but both mules were eating. How? How did they? Muttered Benny. They're sharing, Sally answered. Bossy and Stiffy were happily bent over Stiffy's trough, gobbling up the hay. It did not take long before Stiffy's food was gone. Then the mules walked over to Bossy's pile of hay and began munching again. How simple, said Benny, shaking his head. They learned to share. Why didn't we think of that? Asked Sally. What was the secret of the mules' happiness here? Emma?
To share.
Yes, they learned to share. Then Sally asked, why didn't we think of that? Why didn't they think of that? Kylie?
Because they were only thinking of themselves.
They're only thinking about themselves. All right? And what else? Someone else. Deshaun?
It's because they were selfish.
They were selfish. Someone else. Why? All right? Noah?
Because they didn't listen to their mother and father's advice.
Did you hear that? Because they didn't listen. When Mom was trying to tell them sharing brings happiness, they stuffed their ears. And they had a very miserable time here. That's why they didn't think of that, because they didn't listen. And you too will avoid many problems in life if you just learn to listen. Look at them, said Benny. They look so happy. Of course they're happy, answered Dad from behind them. Dad, Mom, Sally called. Bossy and Stiffy are sharing. That's the way it should be, said Mom. They were tied up in knots, Benny explained, and they couldn't eat or do anything. And they were so sad, added Sally, until they decided to share. Sally paused as she remembered something Mom had said. I guess it is true. Sharing does bring happiness. It sure worked for them, said Benny. Dad untied the ropes, and Bossy and Stiffy lay down happily together and rested. "Hooray!" shouted Benny and Sally as they shared a swing. "No more knots!" And they were right. For though the lesson came from a couple of mules, Benny and Sally never forgot what they learned that day. Being selfish and stubborn makes you sad and gets you tied up in knots. But sharing brings happiness. Let me tell you about a story of an old mule a farmer had. When the mule was younger, it was used to plow the field and do a lot of work. But as the mule got old, the farmer couldn't use it anymore. One day, the mule happened to fall into a well. The mule made a racket. He wanted to get out of the well. The farmer came and looked at the mule in the well. He looked at that mule and said, "You know what? I don't need this well anymore. And I really don't need the mule either. I'm just going to take some dirt and bury that mule and take him out of his misery." When the mule heard that, he said, "Hey, I don't want to die." The farmer got a neighbor, and they each took a shovel and started to throw the dirt on top of the mule. When the dirt hit that mule, the mule said, "Hey, what's happening here?" The mule started to shake. Then it got an idea. "You know what? Every time that dirt hits my back, I'm going to shake and take a step." And that's just what that mule did. Every time a shovel of dirt hit him, he shook himself and took a step. Then shake, step, shake, step, shake, step. And the hole was getting higher and higher in the hole. And finally he looked up and said, "You know what? I can jump out." He bent his legs and zip, he jumped out. Learn a lesson from this. In life, you will go through tough times. Everybody does. "Oh boy, here it goes. I'm no good. I'm defeated. I give up." But what you should say, "I'm not giving up. I'm going to make up my mind to solve this problem. I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to work hard." There's a big word for this. It's called perseverance. Regardless how hard it is, you're going to keep on going to make a success out of your life. If you learn this lesson, you'll never regret that decision. So be like that mule and don't give up. That's one of the secrets of becoming successful.
And now, an award-winning song from Character Kids.
Hey, my friend! You shouldn't be unhappy. It's a beautiful day. Oh, you want to play with your friend, but you don't feel like sharing. You better listen to this.
Being selfish and stubborn will make you sad. You'll be tied up in knots. Oh, you feel so bad. Forget fussing and fighting. Be friendly for yes. Sharing brings happiness. I share, you share. Everybody, everywhere. He shares, she shares. Sing a sharing song. Sing a sharing song.
It's sharing time!
Now we know that it's best when we share the load. Pulling opposite ways, we can't get down the road. Working together, we'll get there fast. Right, sharing brings happiness.